Welcome back to Face the Nation. Joining us now is the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara. Good morning.
Good morning.
I do want to mention to our viewers as well that you obviously know New York very well, but you also know the District Attorney, Alvin Bragg.
I do.
You hired him at one point.
Yep.
You endorsed him when he ran for this office.
I did, and I supervised him for a while as well.
Okay, so I want to dig into your knowledge of that man, who is now very much in the spotlight. But let me start first on the case itself. The previous District Attorney in Manhattan didn't prosecute this case. Your former office, the Southern District of New York, also chose at the federal level not to move ahead with it. So what do you think is different this time?
We don't know. I know the man pretty well, Alvin Bragg, as you said. Excuse me. I don't know what the charges are. We've been speculating about them. Maybe there's new evidence. Different people who are reasonable, like Cy Vance is and like Alvin Bragg is, can come to different conclusions about different matters. You know, there were two prosecutors in Alvin Bragg's office who resigned with great fanfare over a different set of charges that might have been brought against Donald Trump. And there was a difference of opinion about that. Alvin Bragg is a careful person, based on my experience with him, a deliberate person, not an overtly political person. And he decided, based on things that we don't know about yet, because we haven't seen the indictment or any evidence at trial, that it was a worthwhile case to bring. I can't, speculate as to why Cy Vance didn't bring the case or why my former office didn't bring the case, although there are some reasons to think maybe it was because they were concerned that Michael Cohen had not been fully forthcoming, and they have a policy of not putting on witnesses as cooperating witnesses if they haven't divulged everything about themselves and everyone else. That was a policy that was in place when I was the U.S. Attorney. So different policies, different legal considerations may be the reason why there's a divergence, but we don't know for sure. So
one of the things that CBS News has confirmed here is that the former president is being charged with falsifying business records in the first degree, which is a Class E felony, if I understand it correctly. And that would require them to prove, in other words, have evidence here, that it's more than the misdemeanor of falsifying records, that it was done to hide a second crime. That seems fairly complex. What kind of evidence do you need to have there?
It's not that complex. It's done all the time. So, the predicate offense, falsification of business records, is pretty simple. It seems to have been conceded in large part by various people, including some of the president's own lawyers, that on the business records of the company, it has been suggested that the payments made to Stormy Daniels and other payments were legal fees when they obviously weren't. Michael Cohen was a pass-through for $100,000+ to someone else. And then the other crime we believe to be campaign finance violation.
But that part is fairly novel here.
Well,
in fact, the former Manhattan District Attorney, Cy Vance, was on another network this morning making that point. He said, we've historically filed cases of false documentation to a felony level when federal statutes were involved, but this has never been done with regard to federal election law. So would the Alvin Bragg who you said doesn't really take a lot of risks here and is not political, would he take this risk?
Well, he's probably done legal analysis, and his people have told him that you can have a federal crime be the thing that's being concealed or being furthered by the falsification crime. And just because it's never been a campaign finance violation before, I'm sure his people have told him, and have research to back this up, that there's no distinction between one kind of federal violation or another. So it is true that that's not been tested in court, and there are going to be legal challenges here. I don't think anybody thinks, and I haven't heard anybody say, even though we haven't seen the charges yet, that it's a slam dunk 100% winner. But I believe, based on the Alvin Bragg that I know, who was careful, and was so careful as not to bring that other case that people were clamoring for him to bring, that he has sound legal ground to bring this one.
The former Trump Attorney General Bill Barr spoke about the indictment in an interview Friday. I want to hear what he had to say.
It's the archetypal abuse of the prosecutorial function to engage in a political hit job. And legally, I think it's from what I understand, it's a pathetically weak case.
You just told us that Alvin Bragg is not overtly political. That's the exact opposite impression from the former Attorney General.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people who think the former Attorney General was overtly political and weaponized the Justice Department, so it's a little bit rich to hear him calling someone else political.
But on the grounds that he says pathetically weak case.
Yeah, well, we don't know that. We don't know.
You're saying until these charges are unsealed Tuesday, no one can speak with authority.
Like, I've been talking about the case because I think we have some credible reporting, and I think we have good sources who are telling us what the case might be about. And we have Michael Cohen talking about it. It does feel a little funny, given my prior job, to be openly speculating about the strength of a case before we've seen what the charges are. And by the way, even when we see the charges, we won't necessarily know what all the evidentiary basis for those charges are. I believe it'll be a speaking indictment, which is parlance for lots of more detail than you sometimes need to have in an indictment. But we don't know the quality of the evidence. We can speculate about the credibility issues that Michael Cohen has. But beyond that, we know some of the documents. We know some of the checks that are signed in Donald Trump's own name to reimburse Michael Cohen for the hush money payment, 11 checks and all that continued, by the way, into Donald Trump's term as president when he was sitting in the Oval Office. But we don't know all the evidence. And what's interesting to me is when people attack Alvin Bragg ahead of time for being political and being weak, they are themselves doing the exact same thing, defending someone who is their political ally.
And we're going to talk about some of that later on with another guest on the show on the politics of this. But because you know Alvin Bragg, and this is Republicans aren't unified on a lot of things these days, but the unified Republican defense of Trump is not to talk at all about the case being built against him, but rather to attack Bragg himself. How would you characterize him in terms of policy? He ran as a Democrat to this office. Does he have higher political ambitions?
No, I don't know that he does. When I said he's not overtly political, obviously every district attorney in almost every jurisdiction in the country, with the exception of a few, is a political office. You run for office. The Alvin Bragg that I know has always thought about the facts and the law, and I keep going back to this point. If he was so overtly political and didn't mind bringing pathetically weak cases, and he was on a witch hunt to get Donald Trump by whatever means possible and as soon as possible, he would have brought this other case that very well-respected prosecutors in his office were adamantly urging him to bring, and he didn't. To me, that indicates someone, and look, this case may fail, it may not go well, maybe it'll be dismissed. I don't think so, because I think the law is probably on Alvin Bragg's side, but we'll see. Maybe he'll lose a trial. But the idea that this is frivolous when someone who has gone to prison, who's less culpable, and gone to prison at the direction of the person we're talking about now, Donald Trump, the idea that this is frivolous or purely political or stupid or anything else is nonsensical.
Because falsifying business records on its face, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, is still a crime.
Yeah, there should be one standard of justice, right? And if there's a crime that's being brought, that's being charged against people in New York City on a regular basis, and in particular has been charged in this kind of context, then to say that someone, because he was the former president of the United States, should get away with it doesn't seem right. I understand the concerns, the prudential democratic concerns. I'm not giving them short shrift. That if you're going to charge a former president in an unprecedented way, you want to be careful. You want to have your T's crossed, your I's dotted. You want to do it not in a casual way. You want to be very, very serious about it and explain in the documents that you file in court and in the indictment that this is serious and someone else has gone to prison for this. And I get that we don't want to be in a position where we're incentivizing local prosecutors to do this kind of thing. But on the other hand, it is not frivolous. It is not silly.
All right. Preet Bharara, thank you for your insights today. We'll be right back. We turn now to John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor under former President Trump. Good to have you here.
Glad to be back.
So, as we were just discussing, Republicans seem to be avoiding explicitly defending Mr. Trump's actions and instead attacking the District Attorney of Manhattan. But we don't know the details of these charges. We won't until Tuesday, if then. Don't you see there being a danger for Republicans to do that because they are still aligning themselves with the former president, who I know you are sharply critical of?
Yeah, I think it's a big mistake politically for Republicans to do that. And I think it's important to stress that in this case that involves hush money to a porn star to cover up an affair that later involves cooking his company's books, you have not heard a single Trump defender stand up and say, oh, that's not the Donald Trump I know. And it goes to the question of character and fitness for the presidency. I think that Trump's obviously trying to attack the prosecutor, and his supporters are following that. Look, prosecutors have broad discretion, and they should, but they don't have unlimited discretion. If Trump thinks there's prosecutorial misconduct here, violating the laws, violating the prosecutor or lawyer's ethical obligations, he has plenty of opportunities to raise that. But if he can't show that Alvin Bragg has violated the law or violated the ethics rules that are applicable, then he's got to run his own chances. And to my mind, there is a kind of rough justice here, because it's deeply ironic that a person who spent a good part of his 4 years in the White House trying to weaponize the Justice Department against his political enemies is now saying he's the victim of persecution. It's sort of what comes around goes around, Mr. Trump.
So you agree that the Justice Department was weaponized under the Trump administration?
I can attest to it personally. I don't need to look at other stories.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when Trump and his lawyers in the White House and in the Justice Department brought both a civil and a criminal case against me for publishing a book that didn't go through the pre-publication review process when they know that it had been cleared in the regular order, that is abusing the Justice Department, and there are plenty of other examples besides.
Well, you brought up your book. In it, you talk about President Trump being obsessed with media coverage of his former attorney, Michael Cohen, who's now very much at the heart of this trial, case, and who was on trial himself. And you said it was a big distraction in the midst of the trip to Hanoi, where the former president was negotiating with Kim Jong-un. I mean, nuclear security. But he was obsessed with the Cohen case. Do you look at that differently now? Do you think there was a real reason for him to be worried, or was it just a PR concern?
Well, I think he does have reason to be concerned about the substance of the case here. And I think while we're all obviously and appropriately focused on the indictment, that's just the beginning. The real issue here is whether Alvin Bragg gets a conviction at some point in the near term, or whether Trump springs free, because the political implications are vastly different.
Well, I mean, the timetable for this goes right into 2024, and we don't have clarity on that.
Well, we'll see whether Trump runs the courtroom or whether the judge runs the courtroom.
What do you mean?
Well, I have no doubt a lot of trees are going to die to support the motions to dismiss the case that Trump's going to file. So if the judge keeps the pace going, you know, people talk about the importance of speedy trial. Let's see if we can get one here.
So you said it was a mistake for Republicans in messaging around this. But even Florida's Governor, Ron DeSantis, who I know in the past you've said good things about, came out and said, it's a misdemeanor. Oh, this is political. Yeah. Misdemeanor, still a crime. But, I mean, the only Republican of prominence that has really remained silent that I've noticed is Mitch McConnell. Well, most everyone's defending in some way.
I think Asa Hutchinson said earlier today, in addition to announcing he's running for the presidency, that Trump should stand aside. And I think that's an absolute minimum. Look, Trump is basically extorting...
So that's 2 plus you, that's 3.
That Trump is basically extorting the Republican Party. He's threatening that if he doesn't get the nomination, he'll blow up the presidential campaign, and whoever the Democrats nominate will win.
And it seems to be persuasive.
Well, I think what Republicans need to do to save the party, and frankly to save the country, is they can be as concerned about poor Donald Trump being mistreated by this prosecutor as they want. But the reward, the cure for that mistreatment is not to make Donald Trump the Republican presidential nominee. Those are 2 completely different subjects.
I understand your point. You have said in the past, if this indictment happens, it's rocket fuel to his campaign to get the Republican nomination for the president. And you think that's what Democrats want, essentially, because it benefits whoever the Democratic nominee is, presumably the current president.
I'm not worried about Alvin Bragg hurting Donald Trump. I'm worried about Alvin Bragg benefiting Donald Trump. And this is where I think the outcome of the case is so important. If Trump is acquitted, or he gets the case dismissed because it's not legally sufficient or for whatever reason, that will be rocket fuel, because he can say, I told you it was a political prosecution, I told you I was being picked on, and now I've been vindicated. If he's convicted, however, at some point before the campaign ends, I think that will have a very different impact on people. You can say it's a sleazy case and it involves sleazy people. But if he's convicted of a crime, I think most Americans actually don't want a convicted felon to be their president. So
if he does end up being the nominee, will you support him as the Republican nominee?
Absolutely not. I didn't support him in 2020. I wanted to vote for a real conservative, and neither the Republican nor the Democratic nominee were real conservatives, so I wrote in a name, and I would do the same.
So you have said you might be considering a run. Have you ruled that out, or are you still considering?
No, I'm still considering it. I have to say, watching the response to the indictment has not been encouraging for the future of the party. Trump is a cancer on the Republican Party. We need his supporters. That's absolutely true. Most of them have correct values. The distortion is the magnetic field of Donald Trump.
Well, does it disappoint you that someone you have in the past said good things about, Ron DeSantis, is part of the group circling the wagons around Mr. Trump?
Well, I believe in redemption for everybody, so I think there's still a way ahead here. But I tell you, what the people really want in the nominee, I think, is somebody who will say, this conduct is unacceptable to us, and we have higher values, we have higher principles than simply defending whatever Donald Trump does.
So you're willing to forgive that of DeSantis. You also, however, have to be upset with his foreign policy positions. He said, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. He tried to soften that a little bit afterwards. But it reveals kind of this thread we've seen reflected in some House Republicans of more of an isolationist, or at least less likely to be as muscular.
Well, as I said before, I was disappointed that Ron DeSantis said that. I'm hoping that his view is changing. But I think this isolationism, I attribute a large part of it to Donald Trump. Not that he has any coherent philosophy, but his knee-jerk reaction drives people to take positions that I think they otherwise wouldn't take. I think you go back to a Reaganite foreign policy and a Reaganite optimism that it's morning in America. In fact, it's always morning in America. It's not Donald Trump's version. It's Ronald Reagan's that will get people's support.
John Bolton, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment. Joining us now to discuss Russia's detention of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is the journal's editor-in-chief, Emma Tucker, and she joins us from New York. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret, and thanks very much for having me on. And also, I just want to say before we get going, thank you to CBS and all the other news networks and news outlets that are continuing to focus on this story. It's really important for us to keep focused on Evan's plight at a time when I know the news is very busy.
Well, we agree with you. And I want to ask you, this morning, Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. It is very rare that they speak, but according to the State Department, the secretary had grave concern over the unacceptable detention of a journalist, and that is Evan. What do you know about this? Has any of it helped Evan's case?
Well, one of the big problems in this case is we know so little. To the best of our knowledge, we know that Evan is being held in a prison in Moscow, but we haven't been able to get any messages to him. We haven't heard anything from him. There's been very little official information. The fact that Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke to his counterpart today is hugely reassuring to us. We know that the US government's taking the case very seriously, right up to the top. And as I say, that for us has been, gratifying to know that they take it as seriously as they do.
There is a legal determination being wrongfully detained, and it comes with it a little bit more leeway for the fight that the U.S. government can put up here. What difference do you think that will make in this case, and how quickly will it come?
Well, we're hoping that the government will move swiftly to designate Evan as wrongfully detained. It can take a long time, but we're optimistic it'll move a bit more swiftly in this case. When that happens, it's an official recognition that the charges against Evan are entirely bogus. And once that official recognition comes, things can then move a bit more rapidly.
Well, we know that when Evan was taken, there was also a very swift hearing. His lawyer was not allowed in. The State Department said that U.S. officials were not given any access to him. Do you have any timeline? It sounds like you don't have much more clarity, but will he be given what are supposed to be the legal standards here of access?
Well, I think that's anyone's guess. We are hopeful that A lawyer will get to see him next week. We're pressing constantly for reassurance that he's not being mistreated in any way. But we're dealing with the Russian authorities here. It's difficult to know what will happen next. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to make some sort of contact with him next week, but who knows?
You know, from the very top of the Russian government, we have seen this commented on. Vladimir Putin's own spokesperson claims Evan was caught red-handed. According to our CBS contributor, John Sullivan, who was former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, he said the Wall Street Journal is too high-profile an organization for this to have been a mistake, for this not to have been targeted, and it had to have been approved at the very highest levels in Moscow. Do you have any idea what the motivation was?
I have no idea. Evan is a very talented, experienced reporter. He's accredited to report from Russia, and he was on an assignment doing what he always does. He was gathering information. He was reporting from the ground to provide our readers with eyewitness accounts of what it's like to be in Russia at the moment. It's a complete outrage that he was arrested like this, and I really don't understand. None of us can. What the Russian authorities are saying is utter nonsense.
There was some Russian reporting he was working on a story about the military and others potentially about a mercenary group known as the Wagner Group. Was that true?
Evan was doing what he always does. He was out reporting. He's a very experienced reporter. He's covered all sorts of stories. He was on a mission over in the East, writing about. He was just doing what he always does. He was news gathering and talking to his contacts out there.
I know that I've read you've pulled your Moscow bureau chief from her post. How important is it to be able to continue to report from Russia, and do you plan to be able to continue this in some way?
Well, look, reporting out of Russia has become increasingly difficult, not just for foreign reporters, but especially for Russian reporters. You know, the Wall Street Journal is committed to covering stories from Russia, from stories from around the world. But we're also, obviously, we put out the safety of our journalists first. A lot of other news organizations no longer have a presence in Russia. It's clearly, and particularly with this, what's happened to Evan, Russia is sending a very, a bad signal that it's not a safe place for journalists, even journalists who are accredited to work there, to work from.
Yeah.
So, we are committed to covering the news. We are also committed to the safety of our journalists.
So important. Emma Tucker, thank you for your time. We wish you well. We'll be right back.